lists come up repeatedly, and often when you have somebody who's had a genuine experience, almost everything on this list has been part of their life. So I think that's worth talking about. Then we're going to move into how you decide to work with somebody, how you go about that, in particular, at least from my perspective, in my 5 years that I've been doing this, which doesn't sound like a long time, but for mental health professionals, I'm one of the oldest doing that. Dr. Mack at Harvard's been at it only 3 years, so I feel like an old person in having dealt with this. And we'll be talking about hypnosis, hypnotic techniques, strategies, different procedures, and therapeutic ideas during hypnosis and after hypnosis, as well as what I call hypnotic trick questions, which I think are very important so that we aren't accused of leading the subject toward making them have all these stories. I hear that, and it's amusing because I've never found that to happen in some 300 sessions. So anyway, we'll talk more about that, and we'll talk about support networks, phone networks, support groups, and different aspects of that, and anything else that we don't cover. And I know that's a lot right there, but if there's something that we haven't covered, then please feel free to ask questions and ask pointed questions, tough questions, because I find that rewarding to have a good, challenging question, because if I haven't thought about it, I need to. And if I don't have an answer, I need to find out why I don't. So, I think it's real important just to fire any kind of question up here. Don't be nice, just say it. I've battled with skeptics and critics and colleagues, and actually the colleagues are the kindest. I've been amazed. I thought they would laugh or snicker and give me all sorts of trouble, but instead they said, tell me more, what have you found, what's all this about? And some have gotten involved, so I'm rather amazed. And I always have said, since I'm in the field of psychology, if by some far out chance this is all a psychological phenomenon, then I'm still in the right ballpark. So I guess I can't lose, but I'm not finding it psychological. One of the papers that you can order there, I do have some, by the way, some of those 2 papers. We do have them, and they'll be out later when the conference begins. So if you want to get those here today, I do have them. But one of them is the results of an hour and a half speech I gave in Chicago in about 2 or 3 years, thinking about what it's not. This is not this is not this, and just ruling out different explanations given, different skeptical remarks, all the psychiatric categories that seem appropriate to consider. And in fact, I even need to update it with some others, like false memory syndrome. I don't have that edited in yet, but I will. Because there's just, things like that can explain some parts of this, but not some really good cases where, like say, the child just had the experience the night before. There's no trouble remembering just hours ago what happened, or the people who just found themselves in the middle of the field in the car parked over here. There's no problem remembering. It's not like something from 20 years ago that they're foggy about. And also when you have 2, 3, or 4 people taken at the same time and you hypnotize them independently and they come up with the same matching details, that goes well beyond the fabrication from the subconscious or from their personalities or backgrounds. So there's factors there that rule that out, at least in a great many cases. All right, well, let's just roll on here and just don't hesitate to raise a hand and stop me if you have something you want to clarify. Talking first about symptomology, the first thing is that people often see an unidentified flying object or some kind of unusual light source. Might even be in their bedroom, some ball of light hanging in the bedroom. So there's some kind of peculiar incident like that. Now, not every single case has to have that, but it's common that they do see something, and of course that's what makes them think maybe this is UFO related. I just wrote a column called Coping Responses and Credibility, in which I talked there about the fact that there's a lot of people who probably have had experiences, and we know of some, who never made the connection and have lapsed into 20 and 30 years of alcoholism and other problem behaviors and break up in marriages over and over because they don't know where the irritation and the confusion is coming from. So for those people who don't remember seeing an object or don't make the connection, their lives can be pretty rough. Okay. Second, an unexplained period of apparent amnesia or missing time, sometimes shared with another participant, which is medically unlikely. Now think about that. I don't know, and I've talked with a number of people, any medical explanation for shared amnesia that starts at the same moment, especially if you're driving a car, that everyone in the car suddenly begins forgetting at the same minute and starts remembering again at the same minute without any injury or medical explanation whatsoever. It makes no sense in terms of psychology either. And, you know, my only explanation I can come up with, other than some kind of UFO involvement, is that somebody snuck up behind them all and hit him over the head at the same moment, yet causing no injury. Now, of course, that sounds crazy, but that's about the only thing I can come up with that might even come close to explaining how people could do that. So that's a very interesting part of it. And by the way, skeptics never touch that. I've never heard them talk about the shared amnesia. They don't know how to tackle that one. Okay, third, at the same moment that they may suddenly lose time and then feel like they're still driving on, but then they notice it's 2 hours later or something like that. And it seems rather continuous, perhaps, unless, of course, they got to put back the car going the wrong way on the wrong road, and that has happened, which is kind of alerts the person there's something peculiar going on. But if they do make a smooth transition back and it seems continuous, what they might notice is that suddenly they have an onset of irritability, anxiety, fatigue. A case I'll talk about Sunday morning in my slideshow has to do with two women who saw the object and it came down to within 100 feet of their car. Their adrenaline's flowing, their hearts are pounding, they're all excited, they're looking at it, and the next thing, just in a flash, they're driving on and they're tired, they're exhausted, they don't want to talk to each other, they just prefer solitude. A drastic change in what seems like seconds. Now again, that does not make any sense. Of course, what they found that there was 2 hours involved there, which they had well documented, turns out. So, and we'll talk more about that tomorrow. So there's this sudden switch, this sudden onset that comes on. Another part of that is a person may be in their house, in the middle of their workday, in a car, and suddenly they have this strong feeling of, I just need to pull over and go to sleep. Makes no sense. And they fall sound asleep. It doesn't matter where they are or how late they're up to the night before, nothing. They just feel compelled to go sound asleep. And it's interesting when, yes?
On that time factor, are there watches changed or other time pieces in the area that they could alter also?
No, actually this is what helps, that clocks and watches keep going unless they are affected by some kind of electromagnetic force. And some of them have just quit. But they keep going, which is what usually alerts the person to, wait a minute, you know, shouldn't take an extra hour and a half to go a 15-minute drive. You know, that alerts you that something's wrong here. So yeah, usually the watches and clocks stay the same. Yes?
John, what would you make of a situation where someone is driving on a large 3-lane highway? It's very foggy out, misty, it's snowing a little bit, dark, but it's the noon hour, and the person becomes very, very sleepy and drowsy while they're driving, fights and struggles to stay awake, and dozes off and comes to very quickly when they realize they're in another lane and veering all over. But when they look around or look back, they see the highway is completely deserted, and so falling asleep really is no problem.
Well,
And
maybe.
then, after a certain point, say the person literally does fall asleep and just can't keep up the struggle, and say 45 minutes later has no idea where they are.
They wake up in a different place.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
But
that's
they've
peculiar
apparently
indeed.
been driving all that time. Does that sound like a psychological problem?
Well, that could be a number of things. I mean, a lot of people just get tired of driving, and that sounds like a person who just needs to pull over. This is something where they feel, I need to pull over, and I need to go to sleep, and it's just like immediate. They don't fight it for an hour. It's just like immediately they just need to lay down, and wherever they are, they just do it.
Well, in this case, after they struggled, say, for 5 minutes, then amnesia set in, so that this section of about 45 minutes was removed from their life, just like you take a movie film and splice it, or cut and splice it
Had
together.
they parked before they?
No.
Oh, well.
Could be a sleep disorder.
Yeah.
Your phenomenon is after a continuous experience of some kind. It's a continuous experience, then all of a sudden they feel this. Like the assumption you're talking about is these are happening after an experience took place. Immediately.
The sleeping?
Yeah.
Oh no, it's usually right when something's about to happen.
So it's a
It's kind of a way to,
It's a precursor.
yes,
Okay.
exactly. It's to lure the person over, and we hear it all the time. It's just amazing. One real good example: a woman heard a smoke alarm go off in her house, and she got up real frightened, and because she thought, sure, there must be a fire. She saw a strange bluish light coming from her daughter's room, so she heads right to the doorway of her bedroom, halts, and says, I think I need to lay down. I mean, she has a strong feeling, and so, again, adrenaline's pumping, You're not going to fall sound asleep when your adrenaline's pumping and you're wide awake. She goes, lays down, she just happens to notice the clock, and it's 2:10. Goes sound asleep. Next thing she knows, she's waking up, and she gets this impression everything's okay now. Looks at the clock, it's 3:10. It's exactly 1 hour later. And then she's thinking, how could I have laid down? And I thought, my daughter's in danger and the smoke alarm's going off. But we hear that kind of thing, makes no sense, frequently. Okay.
I just want to
yes.
sort of address, because I think that's an important thing. One is that it could be, there is a sleep disorder.
Yes,
That
yes.
mimics that. The other thing is that I think all of us have had the experience of driving and going into some kind of a light trance.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a part of us that keeps us on the road and safe.
Yes, and if you're in that kind of hypnagogic stage, or, you're not really asleep, but you're, as you said, kind of in an altered
You
state.
don't really know how you got there. And it's
Right.
like, whoo, I got where I was supposed to be in.
Right.
I don't remember.
We do that in town. We go through 3 intersections, and we are not thinking about it. Then we wonder,
Did I run that light?
Yeah.
What if, though, you do that normally, but this is altogether different, it's a totally different quality?
Yes, it is. It is. And then, again, it makes no sense why these people would suddenly be falling asleep when they were alert, maybe middle of their workday, and they just had this strong feeling they needed to go lay down on a couch in the employee lounge, which they never do. But this day, they just had to do that, and then, of course, there's an experience attached that we find later, and they didn't realize. But anyway, let's move on, and we'll talk about these kinds of things as we go. Most of these subjects have no lack of interest, or no interest or knowledge in the subject of UFOs. You would think that most of the people I work with had read things and followed the subject and came to me because they knew something about it. And usually it's just the opposite. Most of the people I've worked with really don't know anything about it, or they've heard very little. Perhaps a friend told them to call me because they knew I had worked with this kind of problem. And usually they're directed to me because they can't sleep, they're anxious, they're having strange dreams that doesn't make any sense to them. And they did see something in the sky, and there is this peculiarity about the experience of some nature, and that's all. That's all. In fact, Sky, who will be speaking later today, and who I'll be showing the investigative side in my slideshow, she thought it was all tabloid stuff. She thought it was all baloney. She thought it was fantasy. And wait till you hear her talk now. Quite a change. So most of these people really don't come to me knowing anything much about UFOs at all. And that seems to be a pretty common characteristic. Yes?
There are various groups like MUFON that hold occasional meetings.
Right.
You don't find that some of the people that go there aren't really sure why, but they just feel a need to try to learn more?
Yeah, there's people who attend those that are drawn to it without a conscious idea of why yet. And some of them may never approach anyone for help, but yet there's this fascination. Most of the people that I've worked with aren't going to meetings first. Usually they don't even know about such meetings until after they've been in our support group and learning about stuff after we've worked with them. Okay. With any psychological testing that's been done and all the clinical interviews that I've done, not found any psychopathology that would account for these experiences, nothing that would serve as the source. Now, it's not to say that a person can't have psychological problems. They may be having marital troubles, they may be having some other issues, but those things seem separate, and it's not that often that I even find that. But if there is something else going on, it just seems like way over here, and then this experience is over here, and there doesn't seem to be any symbolic connection or representation of their life in their abduction experience. And certainly when I've seen other kinds of traumas and the ways they manifest themselves presently. Just a quick example, the lady I was working with this week, her son had been bitten by a neighbor's dog, and the neighbor shot the dog, and she felt guilty about that. And all these intense feelings came up, and she had to be hospitalized. And it just seemed like a lot of reaction for a little event. It went way back to when she was 16, and she had a fiance die in a car accident, and his mother blamed her. And so from that point on, she had a great fear of anything she was involved with might cause harm to somebody. And here, this little thing happened and triggered all those little feelings. And you could see the connection. You could draw the lines, and you could trace it back. And with these UFO experiences and the person's life, you just don't see how this could have come from the way they have lived. It doesn't represent their personality traits. It doesn't represent the way they think or believe. It's usually just the opposite. We've had some real difficulties with people raised like fundamental Baptists and then suddenly have these experiences and it shakes them up. It's not because it fits in with the way they already believe. It's challenging their beliefs. Yes?
Just wanted to mention, because some of you don't know, that the November '93, this month's issue of the Quarterly Journal of Abnormal Psychology has a study from Carleton University in Ontario, where they did, basically what they were trying to establish was, are UFO witnesses sane, normal people? And the study was overwhelming. It came up absolutely. UFO eyewitnesses are sane, normal people, and their sample group included people who had waking experiences of being on board a craft, waking experiences of seeing aliens face-to-face, having telepathic conversations, and they said these people test absolutely sane.
Good.
And I think it's a very important study. We want to check it out, Journal of Abnormal Psychology.
I appreciate that. I'd heard about that. And do you have a copy of it by chance, Michael?
No, I don't. I should. I was surprised to discover how hard it is to come up with that journal. It's very well thought of, but hopefully your library will have it.
Yeah. Journal of Abnormal.
Journal of Abnormal Psychology.
January 93.
November 93, yeah, third quarter.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll be quoting that one a lot.
It's
I
a very
certainly
good
found the
journal.
same thing.
Very different.
All right, I think we're only up to number 6 here. We'll get through it.
What was 5?
5 was the lack of psychological source or psychopathology. Number 6, an intense fear of ridicule and rejection. They have no desire for publicity. In fact, most of these people are even scared to talk to me, and I'm in the field. Just absolutely terrified of anybody finding out. First of all, they secretly think that they're going crazy, but yet they really don't believe that, but they fear that they are. And they certainly don't want anybody to know. So, you know, Philip Klass and other skeptics have said, oh, these people just want attention, they just want to write books and get on TV. Absolutely false. And that's another thing about Skye, who'll be speaking later today. She had a whole year of confusion and terror and adjusting, and you don't see that today. You will not see that today, but I saw it. And I saw all the things that changed for her. And so you only get this little snapshot of a view of her now, and you don't see all that process that she went through. So even those that do come to public speaking as a sincere effort to say, hey, this stuff's real, wake up, there's very few that do that, but those that do have gone through a process to get there. All right, number 7, strange and vivid dreams about unusual lights, beams, and procedures that absolutely make no sense in the subject's usual world, yet these are reoccurring images. Number 8, appearance of odd scoop marks, precise incisions, needle marks, punctures, or geometrically shaped bruising. It's amazing how many triangular bruises I've seen. And also triangular needle marks in a perfect triangle. And at first I thought, well, that's maybe just an oddity, a coincidence, and then I kept getting more and more, and other researchers did too. One doctor told me, there's no way something heals in a geometric shape. She says, I've never seen anything like this. She was just totally amazed.
John, can that be on any part of the body, or
Yes.
is it more likely to be somewhere else?
It tends to be usually on the legs or arms, but it can be anywhere.
Because I saw one right in here.
Yeah.
So I thought it was an unusual placement for it.
Yeah, it can get to unusual places, but generally anywhere on the hands and arms and legs, and also the back. I mean, it can be anywhere. Okay.
I recently had someone who had one on her back, and
Mhm.
she,
Couldn't see it. Put it
genital
that way.
area didn't feel comfortable, and she looked with the mirror, and she had them on her genital area also.
She had one there too.
She had a series.
Ah,
So
interesting.
that would be important to have people examine themselves pretty carefully.
Yes, we try to get them to do that. Usually they minimize it. That's another thing about these marks. Usually the person says, oh, that's nothing. Or they don't even notice it until after they've had a hypnosis session and they remember some kind of procedure, and we say, well, has anyone ever looked at the small of your back to see if there's any mark there? Well, no. So we'll check, and sure enough, right in that spot, see, in hypnosis, I made, instead of having them describe it, I'll say, put your finger where you feel that happening. And then they'll really pinpoint it, which is good. And when we check later, there's often a mark or a scoop or something there that they're amazed. They go, oh my God, you know, they didn't know it was there. And so that's usually how they find things, is actually when they go looking later and they know something may have happened there. Also, they may come up with all sorts of explanations. For example, one kid told me, well, I got that when I fell off my bike. Oh, so you remember riding your bike? Well, yeah, but well, you remember falling? No. Do you remember cutting your leg? No. Do you remember any kind of injury on your bike? Catching your leg in the wheel or something strange? No. Well, actually, I don't know how I got that, but that must be how I got it. Okay. And you hear that a lot. Okay, number 9, an onset of unusual emotional reactions to environmental stimuli, even to a hypersensitive or phobic level of response. And one which I'll be talking about Sunday morning involves a woman who had a 30-year phobia to dolls because at 4 years old she swore they moved in her room at night. And now get a load of this, because this is not your typical reaction to having such a but she had all of her dolls taken out to the railroad track behind their house, and her grandmother laid them there so the train could run over them all. Now, that's not the way you usually throw something away. That's a very hostile, very angry or upset type of response, and especially for a 4-year-old. And this continued on, and she could never have dolls, and as a mother, she wouldn't let her daughter have any dolls either. So that's really intense, but she couldn't stand to look at the dolls. And I'll explain Sunday morning. I'll just leave you hanging on that. I'll leave you Sunday morning with the answer to how that turned out as to what really happened. But people could, Bud has a great example of this lampshade. It has, the way the lighting is, it kind of creates a triangular shaped glow on the lampshade. And these kids were just terrified of it. And it turned out that that's the shape of the alien head, and that was triggering some kind of reaction subconsciously. Also, Sky's daughter would tell you, and now it goes into her family, that her daughter at a young age couldn't stand these pictures that were hanging on the wall of those dogs that would gamble and play cards and have the big sunglasses. Well, it was the big dark sunglasses on the dogs that she couldn't stand having on the wall. So Sky had to remove the pictures from the room. Her daughter was just terrified of them. And later, we found out that the daughter had some experiences too. So there's certain reactions like that don't make any sense that people will have. Number 10, also unexpected reactions to other stimuli: sounds, smells, images, actions. I had one lady was making dinner and was doing something with onions, and she got the smell under her fingernails, and when she put it near her nose, it triggered a memory of a substance that she had touched on board a craft, and the whole thing just kind of came flashing back to her. She didn't understand it until we did hypnosis, and it was amazing. It just unlocked the whole experience, and a very interesting one. But, smell is a very crucial trigger for a lot of things. You can know not to look at something or to close your ears to something, but smell is one of those senses that it's too late. You've already smelled it and it's registered, and it's kind of hard to stop smelling it too. So it can become an important cue. Number 11, a driving or nagging feeling that something has happened to them that cannot easily be ignored or forgotten, even 15, 20, or 30 years later. I don't know how many people have come up to me and said, there's just this real strange thing that happened to me 20 years ago, and I just can't get it out of my head. Some people have kept doodles from 15 and 20 years ago. Now, most people don't store their doodles, but there was just something about it that they had to keep. There was something important about it. And so you get that kind of response too. Number 12, and this is a rather dramatic one, unexplained dislocation in physical space. Go to bed and wake up outside, standing in a field. Now, something is more than psychological about that. You're driving a car, suddenly the car is parked in a field and you're miles from your last consciously recalled location. Standing there, perhaps naked in a field, and your clothes neatly folded beside you, and you're thinking, I was driving my car a minute ago. What am I doing here? Dislocation in physical space. I had one woman, an older Jewish woman, and she's such a character. She was so angry. She said, I can't stand it. I keep waking up outside, and I don't have the keys with me, and they took my nightgown. Somebody's got my nightgown, and those are expensive, and I don't want to keep losing those. And she goes, and I can't get into the house. I don't have my keys. So I'm standing there naked at my front door, and I can't get in, and I live alone. And she just goes rattling on and on about, what am I to do? She's just a real character. Some people, and this is rather dramatic, are put back in the wrong beds. There's a case of 5 that were taken at once, and all 5 were put back in the wrong beds. And they wake up in the morning wondering, not only why are they in the wrong bedroom, but why are their feet on the pillow and their head other end of the bed, something screwy. And Bud he just told me last weekend about a woman who went to bed in her new Victoria's Secret nightgown, and her little boy is beside her in his favorite little jammies that he always wears to bed. And they both wake up the next morning feeling kind of funny, and then especially feeling funny when they look and notice that now she's wearing an oversized man's shirt, and there's no man in the house. And the little boy is wearing an older boy's jammies, and both of their belongings are gone. And I said to Bud, well, I wonder which guy woke up with the Victoria's Secret. And I'm sure his wife is wondering where he got that too. So those are a little dramatic, and they do make mistakes. Yes.
John, do you think that those mistakes are made intentionally to alert the people?
I don't think so, really. I really don't. I've wondered about that, and that has come up a number of times, but there's so much that is like carefully guarded and kept secret, but then they make just little errors like that, which probably they don't think about. And, I mean, we notice, if you have 50 people on board and all their clothes off, you might get a few mix-ups, and they may not even realize that. I know that sounds bizarre, but when people wake up in the wrong clothes, something went wrong somewhere.
Also, if you had different groups at times performing these acts, some groups would know the cultures of possibly of various countries, but some would not. Sure. Especially if it was their first time, their first investigation.
Sure.
So they could make all those errors.
Sure. So it's a clue for sure. You get something like that happening. I know one case where a guy was in his front yard, and all of a sudden he sees a bright light, and he comes to 15 miles away, standing near an airport. Now, it's a good drive to get there, and there's no way he could have walked. And he's real upset. When the police came along and picked him up, so there's verification, he's suddenly somewhere else. So, yes.
I'm sure your professional colleagues ask about fugue states and things like that.
Sure.
How people show up in strange places with can't-be-done things.
Oh, yes, and I've worked with multiple personalities and dissociative disorders. And under hypnosis, you can often find, what happened, and it's very clear, and or people witnessed them or saw them acting differently or checking into a hotel under a different name. So you can track that pretty well.
Screams those out.
Right. But when it's like, say, 20 miles away and his wife just saw him 5 minutes earlier and there's no car and he's suddenly over there, he'd literally have to fly on his own to get to that location. He couldn't even drive there at the time. So it's that kind of thing that certainly raises a lot of questions. I think there was a case, too, where a person ended up in a whole different state, whole different part of the country. I forget how many hundreds of miles they were away, but really got put back in the wrong place.
With their clothes on or off?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, luckily. Yeah. A long way to be away from your clothes. Yes.
Has anybody ever attempted to see if somebody else was way out of place? Now, some of these things, like in people from the same household in the wrong beds or people with the wrong clothes, and if somebody is way, way away, like the fellow from the front yard to the airport, could somebody else that should have been at the airport wound up in his neighborhood?
I don't know of exchanges like that in particular, but I'm sure it could happen. Interesting point. Yeah, I don't know of any exact case of that, but that's a very good question. Certainly it would make sense. That's why they made the mistake.
Well, in that situation where you had 5 people in the wrong beds, were they in the beds of the other people in the 5?
Yes, yes. There were no strangers that appeared in the house. At least
and all of them were in the same house?
Yes,
These
they're
were
all in the
different
same
houses.
house, they're just the wrong bedrooms. They probably don't remember who sleeps where. You just take them and then, well, I think he was here, Okay, so that's another clue. Number 13, the doodling. I've had people give me doodlings from 20 years ago, 15 years ago, they had on notebooks, and they didn't know what it meant. But it's interesting that under hypnosis, it's exactly, the images that they had encountered back at that point in time. often doodling just a kind of a triangular shape and 2 black dots, and they look at it and it doesn't make any sense, but they just can't stop doing it. You know, just kind of feel driven to keep doodling this thing. Let's see here. Also, number 14, avoidance of areas where something took place. We've had people that they normally drive this route to work, and now they can't do it anymore. They have to go way out of their way, a great inconvenience, to avoid this particular stretch of road. They don't know why they're doing that, but they just feel panicky to drive down that route, which they normally have driven before. And that bothers them, and that's a clue, too, that something's not right. Why would they have to avoid this particular area? Okay. And again, any one of these things by themselves may not have anything to do with UFO encounter. Like I said, usually you get almost all of this when you're working with somebody who's genuine. It's rather amazing how it's so complete. The next one, number 15, unexplained bleeding from the nose, ear, rectum, sometimes scars, although usually the scars are bloodless. There may be a little one drop of blood on the pillow, a little circle of blood, maybe a little pinpoint of blood on the wrist or something. It doesn't make any sense, and it may not be anything. I mean, there again, by itself, that doesn't mean anything. It did mean something when there was a case of, I think this is, a case of Bed Hopkins, where 5 people woke up at 4:20 a.m., all came out of their bedrooms, and all were bleeding from the right nostril at the same time. Now, that's a cute trick. I mean, to wake up at that time and all have a bloody nose from the same side simultaneously, that was more intriguing. Yes?
So have you had anybody with missing skin from their, that felt like their skin was taken out of the inside of their nose? That kind of case?
Yes.
And also the tongue being slit.
Ooh, slit.
Yeah, this person had their tongue slit underneath, and then shortly after, it healed very quickly, a very deep cut that
Healed very quickly.
healed
That's
very
another
quickly.
characteristic.
And then he had enhanced taste. His taste became extremely enhanced.
Interesting.
Afterwards.
That is interesting. I don't doubt that could happen. I hadn't heard any of tongue slits before. There's been things with the dental work, and one dentist says, when did you have that terrific root canal done? I mean, that's good work. The person says, I've never had any root canal done. And what are you talking about? Oh yeah, you did. This is great work. Who did that? Bleeding like that can go along with it. In the case of Skye, which I'll talk about Sunday, she was with another woman, and she actually observed the woman on a table being examined and something put up her nose. And that woman had a terrible nosebleed, one of the first in her whole life, consciously after that period of amnesia. Okay, 16, the feeling of being monitored, a fear of looking up. I have people that they say, I don't know why, but when I walk out of the house, I just don't want to look up in the sky. I just know I'm going to see something, or I'm afraid I'm going to see something. I don't even know what I'm going to see, but I just don't want to look up. I feel like I'm being monitored, and of course this sounds paranoid, and it may be, but in conjunction with everything else, it actually makes a lot of sense. They may hear their name called, and this is often in the early morning hours. Their name's called, and they feel compulsion to get up and go outside. There's a case recently where a woman got up to go to the bathroom, and her husband got up, and kind of like in a daze, like he was sleepwalking. And she noticed that he was up, and so she kind of followed him secretly through the house, and he walked outside, and she saw him disappear in a blue beam of light. And she consciously watched that, and of course that was unnerving, but he somehow was kind of like awakened and summoned outside. And that happens a lot of times in these cases. But they often will tell me, I don't know why, I heard my name called, and I looked around, and I knew I heard it, and wasn't hallucinating. It was real clear. And so I got up to check it out. So there are little precursor signals like that that can happen. Okay, let's see here. Now, along with that, number 17, abrupt, unexpected, unwanted, and intrusive telepathic messages. I hear this a few times where a person says, I'm doing the dishes, I got my mind on work, I'm thinking about this and that, and all of a sudden this formula comes into my head, the square root of this equals the propulsion rate of blah, 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 something that's just not even, in their thinking. And it's funny because most of these people will run to the dictionary and look up the words to see if they are even words, because they don't recognize them. And they will find them in the dictionary, but they didn't recognize the words, so it's not even really something that was part of their thinking. And they told me that if they didn't write it down right then, that they would forget it, which is a lot different than a hallucination when the person can tell you a week or two later, oh yeah, those voices were telling me to kill myself, and that I'm a terrible person, and that kind of thing. It's a lot different. And these people don't want this. They often tell me that they try to shut it off. Those who have opened themselves to it, and Sky is one that has found herself getting that, and when she opened herself to it, she got some incredible information. And I'm sure she might share a little bit of that with you today. So that may happen. And a lot of researchers, when that starts to happen, they think, I don't want to talk to this subject anymore. They're confusing me, or they're getting into channeling, and they start to push it away. But I've noticed just in collecting the data that when it comes up, it's most interesting in how it comes up, because they don't say it's like words, they say it's like an image that comes to them, and then they know kind of what words to put to that image. So it's like a visual thing that comes to them, and this is very consistent across many subjects. All right, number 18, enhanced psychic ability, especially with those who have had lifelong experiences. It is incredible how high this correlation is. I wondered about that for some time, thinking, well, why would that have anything to do with it? And then I got to thinking that, there's so much telepathy on board in these experiences. They're causing our mind to work in a way that it's not used to doing, and perhaps like a muscle that's not used. They're exercising something perhaps mentally, and I don't know how to physically describe that, but if it's being used in that way, it makes sense that after the experience that they could inadvertently continue to be able to pick up things mentally, because this part of the brain is getting trained or used or exercised or whatever term you want to use. That makes a lot of sense to me. And also the idea of getting messages. If the communication is telepathic on board, and then they're having these messages come to them when they're in their home, what's the difference? Except that you just don't see the thing in front of you. But the process of communicating is still the same. So it gets tricky though, because if you have someone that comes to you that only channels and only gets messages and there's none of this other stuff at all, then I would be very suspicious. It gets tricky, but this in conjunction with everything else I've been describing is real interesting for me. Number 19, peculiar nocturnal sensations. And again, this by itself may not mean anything. But a lot of people have told me I came to floating about 2 feet above my bed and then dropped into my bed. In fact, there's one case, a woman had a water bed, and her 2-year-old often came in the night and slept on the end of the water bed. And when she fell to the water bed, the wave rolled the 2-year-old off of the bed onto the floor. Well, that wasn't imagined. She fell from a significant height to create a big enough wave to roll him off. So there was something to that. People often feel like they're pulled out of bed. Several people said it's like a big vacuum cleaner. It's just like a suction just right out of the bed. And it's a very peculiar sensation. Also, kind of the other side of that, suddenly falling asleep, people have what I have termed slammed awake. And that came from a subject, that term. But I've asked other subjects if that kind of fits, and they said, oh, that's perfect. Because it's like someone flips a switch. It's not like you kind of come to or even jolt awake. It's like, it would be like watching a movie and they switch scenes. And just suddenly you're awake and you're looking around and you're wondering why you're standing there or sitting there, and there's no process of waking up at all. And I had a case where 4 people, 2 were visiting and 2 lived there, 4 people were kind of camping out in the same living room. And they all of a sudden, at 3:20 a.m., were sitting up, looking at each other, all wide awake. And none of them remembered waking up. They just were suddenly sitting there. And of course, they all had been together on an experience, it turned out. So this sudden awakening is also rather interesting.
I have a question in conjunction with that. Have you had any, sensation of being out of body? I mean, I've had, someone say, well, it gets to be hard to distinguish whether was occurring happened in the body, to their physical body, or out of body.
Yes, that's a good point. I've tried to check on that in hypnosis. I'll have them try to notice, to just look back at the bed, and just look at the bed. And they will remark. I won't have to ask, do you see yourself there? Because that's a leading question. I'll just say, look at the bed and see what you notice. And of course, if they see themselves laying there, that's going to be rather startling. But so far, every single person has not seen themselves in the bed. I do think there are experiences that are somehow just out-of-body abductions. I had one in particular where the person fell to the floor and they thought he was dead and they tried to revive him. And he was just somehow in an altered state, but he recalled some kind of abduction. And he'd had a number of experiences. It's hard to say, but when they've been able to look back and check, their body's not there. And it is a very similar sensation. So it gets tricky. But again, by itself, it may be hard to determine. But with all this other stuff, it may fit a pattern in. Okay. 20, effort to rationalize or desperately create unlikely explanations or even hope for insanity rather than claim any intrusions by alien beings. This one woman came to falling to the floor in the corner of her bedroom. They missed her bed. She comes to falling to the floor. And she thought, well, that's strange. So she figured that she must have stood up in her sleep, in her bed, sleptwalked, tripped over the covers, did a forward somersault, and ended up over the floor. And then, of course, all that activity woke her up, and that's why she came to 15 feet away from her bed, falling to the floor in the corner. It doesn't work. She couldn't recreate it, and it just doesn't work. But she desperately wanted to believe that, and that was easier to believe. Nobody was pushing anything else, but she was really tightly clinging to that. And we hear all sorts of bizarre claims. Number 21, presence of screen memories, and this is a real interesting phenomenon. Unlikely images of white animals or other things in unlikely locations. A deer in your kitchen that you're talking to with those nice big doe eyes. A 4-foot chipmunk at the end of the bed. A white bobcat nose to nose with the subject in his bed. One of those, which I think is interesting, a 6-car pileup, although there's no police, no bodies, no broken glass, no ambulances, no sirens, no crowd watching, nothing. Just 6 cars tossed in an intersection, very poorly constructed. And the question has come up, is this just a way of our mind trying to handle it? Yes, that could be, but we've had several really clear examples of the subject being told, you will remember this as such and such. You will think of this as a dream. You will think of us as a whiteout. And in the case of the 2-car pileup, there were 2 witnesses who both had that same screen image. They both had it, and they both remembered it in great detail. But yet, under hypnosis, they both saw a UFO instead under hypnosis. One was taken, one was not. But the intriguing thing was both were given the same image clearly and specifically to remember. And I've seen that in some other multiple witness cases. So that does suggest, even though I think our mind is quite capable of doing it on its own, and it may in some cases, but it seems like it's implanted, the image is implanted as something easier and safer and maybe more dreamlike to remember. And it's interesting how many times I'll say, well, let's take a good look at that chipmunk, and what color is its fur? Oh, it doesn't have any hair. Oh, so it's a bald chipmunk. Yeah, it's really strange. It's a bald chipmunk. I said, well, do you see the cute little whiskers? No whiskers. In fact, there's not even a mouth, really. I said, well, you see the little claws, and it's probably cute in the way it's standing up and banging. Oh, no, it's got 4 long fingers, and it doesn't look like claws at all. By the time they're done, they've got a little gray bean that they've slowly constructed by denying what I'm trying to suggest. And that just comes up over and over and over. It's just really intriguing when you ask those questions, and it's not really what it is. Number 22, unusual electrical responses, often after encounters. This is something that most people don't write about or talk about, but I keep finding over and over. They'll short out microwave ovens, they'll short out computers, they'll short out dishwashers. Even when they walk in the streetlights go out. And then they often come back on after they've walked past. Sometimes they're out permanently. Now I've got someone who's going to videotape this for me soon, and she says every time I do it, it goes out. I said, well, you've got a video camera, prove it, you know. You know, people say this is mythological and it doesn't happen and it's just urban folklore and all that stuff, and it's happening. And I've had people who've lost their jobs because every time they went near the computer, they lost everything on it and said, you can't work here. And it's awful. And it's not all the time. It goes in spells, and it seems now that we're correlating it when they've had an experience. So maybe there's some kind of electromagnetic residual or field effect or something that remains with them. Debbie Jordan, who will be speaking with Bud Hopkins in her case at Kathy Davis and Intruders. Well, she's here, and she's had this happen a lot. And she did the Curlian photography where you put your hand on that film negative and turn the whole thing white. The whole thing solid white. The guy giving her the test is like looking at her like, well, what energy have you got going here? So there's been some physical verification of that beyond the stories. And I'd like to see a lot more testing done with that. Sky's got interesting energy coming from her hands. She's not going to demonstrate that because she's just not that kind of person who's showing off. She doesn't want to do that, but she's had some interesting stuff too. And last of all, believe it or not, number 23, increased interest, even at a very early age, like 4 and 5 years old, in preserving the planet and being tuned in with animals. And it's not a consistent thing that happens, but it's real interesting when a 5-year-old starts talking about ecology and trying to convince his classmates not to litter and they need to take better care of things and save the whales and all this stuff that their parents aren't doing, and they don't even know where they got this, but they just are driven to be real tuned in to the planet and the animals. It's an interesting little piece. All right, so how do you know when to start working with somebody? You may get some of those or all of those things presented to you. I usually send out a questionnaire. It's kind of a combination of a psychosocial history, which of course is from my background training, and then some kind of key UFO questions like, of these names, who do you recognize? And then check off the ones that they've maybe heard or read about or something. And usually they haven't heard of any or maybe one at the most out of 15. I'll ask what books they read, what movies they've seen, what their favorite fantasies are, what their favorite childhood fairy tale was. Just kind of look at what phobias they may have, and all sorts of little questions, unexplained bleeding or physical sensations or problems they've been having. You kind of go at it in a number of ways. And any periods of amnesia, missing time, the observations of UFOs. So I just kind of throw all that together, and it's pretty easy to construct, and you can even do that off of this the symptomology that I just gave you. Mix it in with a lot of other background questions. And as they fill this out, I also ask for a complete narrative of every single conscious recollection they have of any incident, encounter, peculiar dream, or suspected anything that they think might be connected, that they are consciously aware of. And what's nice about this, especially as you get a number of cases, is everything's written down before you even meet the person. They've got all this documented, all their conscious stuff is documented. Plus, it's very therapeutic for them to sit down and really kind of organize it, lay it all out, and write it out for maybe the first time in their life. Often, as they're doing that, that triggers other things that they've forgotten about, and they keep adding on another PS and another page, and so that's a real interesting process even before I meet them. Now, after I get that material, then I can decide whether it's even worth my time. One person sent me 52 dreams and there wasn't one single UFO encounter or incident, and all the dreams were rather interesting, but there wasn't really any clear evidence. And if I just jumped in and started doing hypnosis, it would have been foolish. At least I think so. So what I try to do is assess what their expectations are, what their needs are. If they're just mildly curious, like maybe one of you think, well, I just kind of wondered. And then you're really coping fine, you're doing fine, you're not having any sleep problems. Why stir it up? That old phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I really think that applies. I've changed that a little to say, if nothing's knocking at your door, don't open it. And I think that is a really good rule to follow. Unless it's an intense, nagging curiosity that just is almost obsessive, that's different. But I think that just really helps. And the sessions tend to go much better if you pick someone who's really got some emotional stuff going on. Because that's a big key in terms of unlocking amnesia periods. The more emotional or tense they are, it seems like the better their sessions go, because there's a lot of stuff stirring on the surface. So I'll meet them, and I'll do a face-to-face interview and clinically assess them, and luckily after 14 or 15 years of psychiatric experience with several thousand patients, all kinds, in a hospital unit, I've seen everything you can imagine. And I still see some things that are very rare. And despite all that, these people never look or sound like any of those people I've dealt with. And actually, it's very reassuring. When I was at dinner in Boston with Dr. Mack, he leaned over to me and he said, John, if these were psychiatric patients, there's no way we'd spend our free time doing all this. You're absolutely right. I mean, I didn't use my free time with my family and do other things. But they're not. They're normal, everyday people. And I think when you meet Sky this afternoon, you'll be so impressed by her personality. She just is such a neat person, and I think you really like that. Her case is so incredible. All right, now, with hypnosis, we go into that. I usually try to do a mix of things. I try to physically relax them. I spend a lot of time. I could do the technique where you get them trained to a signal and then you snap your fingers or touch them, and that's okay. But I want to be so sure that they're really good and relaxed that I just do it every time. I really get them physically relaxed and do a lot of mental imagery with their different body muscles and getting the best position and breathing and a lot of those typical induction techniques. And I'll also take them mentally to a place that's very safe and secure that they love to be, and I don't ask what that is. I let them keep that private to themselves. But they'll go there and they'll see all the colors and movements and all the sensory things that go with that place. It's very safe, and you see the smile come on their face as they enjoy it, and you know that they're there. And I may get some ideomotor signaling to verify that they're feeling very good and that they're experiencing a very good visualization. And then I may go several places from there. After I feel like they're really into it, and physiologically all the symptoms are there, being in a good trance. Having taken a good 15, maybe 20 minutes. Then I may go several places. If there's any indication of childhood stuff, I find it helpful to go back to the start, to go back to the beginning. And there's several reasons for that. It puts things in order. If they can recall, as they recall their house from when they were like 10 years old, and they can see their bedroom again, and the posters that were on the wall, and the toys in the corner, and they're kind of reliving that, and seeing the clothes and their favorite shoes, and then they're like in their bed, and they're smelling the sheets and the pillow, and all those things that just bring it all back. And then I'll say something like, and every night was restful and peaceful for you. Well, no. And then they'll start telling me about some night that they were awakened. And they may be surprised to see a little figure in the room. And I'll say, oh, it's just one of your toys you left on a chair. Oh, no, this thing's moving around the end of the bed. It seems to be floating around the end of the bed. And they'll start telling me about that. Now, the thing about that is, not only is it nice to be kind of in the proper sequence to start at the beginning, if you can, but at those points in their life, so it's not a scary thing. And what's nice is that they can tell about that without a whole lot of fear or anxiety, and then your next question is, as kind of an affect bridge, when's the next time that you see this figure? Oh yeah, I saw him, it must have been 2 or 3 years later. And then you're into puberty, and then you can kind of keep going in order. And it makes for a nice progression. That's ideal, I think, if you can get it there. The other favorite place to start is obviously a missing time amnesia period. And it's always interesting to me. I think to myself, there's no way you're going to tell me a UFO story. These people don't believe in it, they don't know about it. They come to me because they don't know what happened in this period of time. And some light which they say is probably something else, although it was kind of peculiar. And here's this maybe shared period of amnesia. I'm thinking, I'm going in, this looks classic, and you tell yourself, it's so classic, it's just got to be, but you don't want to let on, and you go into the session, and you approach the incident detail by detail. For example, if they're in a car, you can hear the sound of the engine, you can feel the steering wheel, you can see the color of the interior and the lights on the dashboard, and you do all that stuff to bring them back. And of course that deepens the trance the more detail that you go into. And as you reach the point where the amnesia starts, they almost always can remember one little detail further. And then that may trigger another little detail. And then all of a sudden something dramatic may happen, like, oh my God, that light's right in front of the car. It's on the ground. I didn't remember that before. How did it get there? And then you just proceed with, well, how big's the light? What does it do? Keep your eyes on it. And you just kind of proceed like that. And it's amazing how they'll unlock that period of amnesia successfully. Now you might think, well, they fabricated it, made it up, they filled in the blank. You might think that until they tell you about unpublished material or classic material they haven't read, and then that, of course, has credibility. But even more so is when you take that second person who doesn't believe in anything and doesn't know what happened, and here they come into the room, and I'm really thinking, all right, this is classic. The first person did remember something, but there's no way the second person can tell me the same story. And in 15 cases now of 2 or more people taken at the same time, I've had 100% matching in every one of those. And it's just like, I know there's going to be a day where it's not going to work. And of course, that won't surprise me on one level, but it will disappoint me on another because they should match. But it's just a real fascinating experience when you do that with independent hypnosis and you get the same details. And what's fascinating is in most of these cases, the second person has twice as much detail than the first. So they couldn't even be duplicating or copying the first person. And then separately I do a second session with the first person, not knowing what the second one came up with, and they'll continue to come out with more detail that matches the first. But yet it's never exactly alike. If it were a hoax, they would plan it, and they would have it be exactly alike, because you wouldn't want it to be different. But in reality, you should have 2 sets of experiences that kind of overlap, because perception is different, and memory is different, and experience is different. Each of you is sitting in a different place in this room, so you're going to remember this from a different angle, a different perspective, and you're going to see different things just from where you're sitting. And this is what comes up in these matching cases. They see different things than other things, but they see enough things that overlap that you know that they're in the same experience, especially when they see each other at the same moment doing the same things that they had reported. And that's just absolutely amazing to me. So I kind of like to specialize in those types of cases now. Betty Barney Hill was such a famous one back in the 60s. And now I've got 15 Betty Barney Hills. So that's very impressive when I look at all that. And in fact, that's exactly what I'm going to be presenting Sunday morning, is about 6 or 7 of those types of cases.
You tape all these sessions?
Yes, audio tape, everything, including conscious recollection. Once they start recalling something, they'll never be able to tell you again, honestly, well, I never took my seatbelt off, I never opened the door, so it's just, I've got Sky on tape saying, We didn't see anything. We never got out of the car. We never unlocked the doors. There's nothing to this. And that's on tape. And now you hear her, and it's completely different. So it's priceless to have that conscious recall on tape. And it's just good for review, because how they talk about things is intriguing in how it's revealed. This one woman kept telling me, as she wrote a letter and I interviewed her, we saw the UFO, we were standing on it, it was all conscious, we both saw it, there was no doubt, it was there, 100 feet over our head, it was amazing. But we never saw any creatures, never looked at anything like that, and don't ever make me think that I did. Well, even as she remembers recalling laying on a table and then pressing and pushing and prodding on her, she's telling me I kept my eyes closed because I didn't want to look at them. And so essentially she was telling me ahead of time from her subconscious that she never looked at them. And that's essentially what she did take a peek, because you have to look at something in order to know not to look at it, You have to do that at least once briefly in order to know not to look. So she couldn't take a peek at them no matter what technique I used until actually she was now back in the car traveling on again. And then I said, well, you probably did take a peek. And she goes, yeah, they look like white toads. You think about a white toad, it's perfect. No hair, no ears, no nose, slit for a mouth, big eyes, and white. Beautiful description. And she goes, I didn't want to see that, but I did. So how she told about it consciously was kind of clues of how it was going to turn out.
John, have you found any cases where a person has been abducted only once?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't think that happens just once. Like the sky, this one incident, beautiful case, just seemed like the only thing that happened to her. And then she remembered something else. And then 3 years later, she was talking with her family in Boston, and just kind of out of curiosity to see if they'd ever had anything peculiar. Her brother had little guys in the room when he was young. Her mother had a ball of light in the bedroom. Her dad had this and that happen. Another brother had, remember being floated out a window. They'd all kept this to themselves. And only when she started asking and they started talking did they suddenly realize that they all had had a peculiar experience, which when added up made sense. And then she told me, oh, I guess all those things I thought were spiritual visits when I was young may not be. I thought, what spiritual visits? And she goes, well, that white figure that came in my room when I was a child. For 3 years she didn't tell me about it because she had cataloged it over here. And then when her family started telling stuff, she suddenly thought twice about it. So then what seemed like just a one incident case became a lifelong set of experiences, which she still hasn't really looked into because there's not a need to right now. So as a researcher, that can be a little frustrating because you want to know the whole story, but you really have to go with where they're at.
Okay, another question along those lines. I've talked to people who claim that they have seen, had numerous UFO sightings, but were never close enough, do not think they're abductees. I get the feeling that people who have a number of sightings must have more connection to it.
Well, you'd certainly be curious about that. If you had a long questionnaire that kind of asked them other kinds of questions, you might get a yes to everything except the feeling of being abducted, which then would suggest that perhaps there is a lot going on there. There are lots of people who see UFOs and never have abductions. That's not unusual. A repeated set of sightings, though, it may be that somebody nearby, a neighbor, or maybe even another family member, is the one who's having the experiences, and this person just keeps seeing things, but is never actually involved. And that has come out a number of times.
There is certainly, in many cases, too, though, resistance to considering the possibility that you're an abductee.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, one chapter of my book is a man named Tom who lays out an absolutely classic set of symptoms of being an abductee. I mean, it's just impossible that he's not an abductee.
Exactly.
But at the time that I wrote the chapter, he had even been regressed by Bud Hopkins at one point, and he still was not identifying himself as an abductee. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want to take on that identity.
Yeah.
And he was okay with that. You know, but I think there's a denial factor.
Oh, absolutely. Very strong. And in fact, I'll get into that real quick here, because when we talk about coping, we'll talk about the phases that they seem to go through as they cope. Now, let me tell you something else about what I do during hypnosis, and then I'll talk about some of these trick questions, and then we'll get into the coping and support issues. During the session, at a key moment where they're very upset, I may freeze the action. And this works so well. And it's probably because we all have VCRs where you can put them on pause. And people can visualize that. And in fact, a couple of times they'll say, what happens next? And they'll say, well, nothing, because it's still frozen. I go, oh, okay, unfreeze the action. And then they can proceed. But at moments like that, they can study something more carefully. Or they can just stop something that may seem hurtful or upsetting to them. At that moment, I may say to them, okay, now although you didn't have this chance at the time, everything's frozen at the moment, and you have an opportunity to tell them off, or to tell them exactly what you think. And this cathartic release during hypnosis is very powerful, because they're reliving it, they're there, and so they can really say, you son of a bitch, you know, how dare you do this, and just get all this anger and frustration out, which is very, very helpful. And it gives them a sense of control at that moment, even though they know that they really didn't have it. At least it's an emotional release, and it is helpful. The other thing I do after a session, if they really seem to have a lot of stuff left over, is I'll have them write a letter to the alien. I do that all the time in regular therapy with the patients, and it's so effective. I'll have them write a letter to the aliens, and in that letter they can ask them questions like, why are you doing this? What is it you need? You know, and they essentially have that much-needed conversation that they never get to have with them. It also may be another way to ventilate feelings, and there's some very powerful stuff that can come out there. So that's very therapeutic and helpful too. Now, with yes.
Did you ever sort of suggest to them that they forgive these people for doing that?
No.
To
No, I don't ever push.
or
I let them follow their own directions. I think I've seen that done, or heard about that actually being done, and it's been detrimental. Person, you can forgive them, these are good, you know, they're not harming you, just go on. And they still have a lot of anger, and they still have a lot of frustration, so you're causing that to be submerged again. And that's not healthy. It's better just to let it flow and then see how they need to cope from there.
Has anyone ever told you that they gave their permission to be abducted?
There's a lot of people that are wanting to give their permission and be willing subjects, but they never get to go. One person told me that actually two people told me, and this gets a little bizarre, but John Mack has found some of this too, that they gave their permission before birth. And I don't know what to do with that. I just let them talk. I don't know how to think about that or conceptualize that. And in fact, Scott was one that told me that. So again, as you meet her later today, I think you'll find that amazing. Yes?
Apropos of that, there's a very interesting book called Visitors from Within that treats that subject. And I don't know what I think of it, except that it's awfully interesting.
Yes, it
As
is.
a possibility. It's just one of the weird wrinkles that some people think they have to.
Yes, it is. It is, and we don't know. And again, things always get stranger the deeper you dig.
Well, my client's first memory was with a past life connection, which was incredibly amazing. But then during questioning one time, the issue of permission came up, and when he challenged them, you know, why are you doing this? You know, why are you doing this? And they said, you gave your permission, and he said, when? And then they said, when you were in the vault. Well, that threw it into some other life that we haven't even explored it.
I've heard a couple times where they have said, or they've been told, would you agree to do this at some point? It just totally confuses them. They don't remember making any kind of agreement. And you don't know also whether that might be a deceptive thing too, like trying to trick them, saying, well, don't you remember you agreed to do this? And trying to maybe throw the subject off. So it's a little risky with only several cases to refer to really know what that's about.
Backing up a little bit, would you comment on this the phenomenon from being taken, going through walls?
Happens a lot. And I always ask them, I'll do leading questions, which I'm going to get into here, about, well, you certainly must have gotten splinters doing that, or that must have been rough. And then they'll say, no, it was, and then they'll give me this experiential feeling.
Everything else really fits within the laws of logic or physics if you buy the assumptions of reality of the phenomenon.
Well,
but that one, you know, is the difficult one within our physics, our concept of physics.
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's our concept. Now, take a hologram, a very nice constructed hologram, and you can pass your hand right through that. But that looks real. Now, and you should read this book if you have not, The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. It really takes a strong look at how our brains, our minds, and the whole universe may be constructed as an elaborate hologram. If aliens somehow can, I don't know what the word would be, to intercept or intercede or interact with that kind of physics and can pass through things and cause us to pass through things. By the way, I usually note that the person is in between beings. You'll notice in my drawings that I present Sunday that there's almost always three, and they're on different sides, and there's like one leading and two on each side, and they'll float the person through a wall. They'll float a person to the ship. In Bud's case with Linda in New York, there was one above and two on each side, floating her up to the craft. It's a very common configuration, and I tend to believe that there may be a field effect between or among these three that enabled you then to be part of their whatever and go with them, like in a bubble. People have said it's like the molecules just dissipate and aren't there and then reform after I go through. It's almost like a door opens and then they go through. It's not like they feel the wall at all. They never do. And the window isn't open. They go through the window, although they often, we are finding, are in a fetal position, curled up. If you don't ask that question, you may not know that that comes up. Why? I'm not sure. But it's real interesting, and there's a lot more because when they get to the craft, they often don't remember a hatch opening. They just kind of go through the wall of the craft. And they don't even say that. They just go, well, I'm at the wall and now I'm inside. I don't know how I did that. So there's a lot of that. We have a couple of cases where people consciously witness people coming through a wall. Back. Now, that's unnerving. But they were the next one to go, it turned out. That's why they were allowed to see it, I guess. So, yes, what? The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. Excellent book, real interesting, and it's basically a summary of a lot of research done on that principle by top physicists. So it's a really...
Michael's last name again?
Michael Talbot, T-A-L-B-O-T. And unfortunately, he died at the age of 39 in New York. Bud told me that because he lives there in New York, and that was very disappointing. I hear he also has a videotape that apparently he made before he died, and he recounts some of his own experiences. It's supposedly very interesting. In fact, the bookseller here at the conference, Chuck, I think he's the one who told me about that, so you might be able to order it. In fact, he may have that book here, Holographic Universe. So check it out. Okay, leading suggestions. We have about half an hour left, so I'll make sure to get to it. Now, the whole point of why I ask leading suggestions is even though I feel like I ask a lot of good open-ended questions, no hypnotist, no matter how good they are going to avoid even the subtlest suggestions. Because of your mindset, of your knowledge, whatever, you may just inadvertently do that. And the skeptics say, of course, that's what happens. So I thought, well, instead of trying to avoid it so, completely, why not just deliberately lead these people in logical directions? And I'll get into examples here. Let me just throw out some of the open-ended questions I do ask. And what happens next? And that really tells a person what to say, doesn't it? eventually from how things are presently. They aren't still there, they're back home, so obviously it changed at some point, and they'll notice how it changes, and then that'll enable you to move forward in the scene. What is it that you're feeling now? The feeling may trigger then other things. What happened just the moment before this? Sometimes the first thing they'll remember is the last thing in the whole incident. And sometimes they'll remember going aboard, and then suddenly they'll be coming back, and you know something happened in between, so you'll back up. And it's amazing. It seems like it would be hard to remember what was just before, but people can do it pretty well. See all that you can see. What do you notice? Nice, vague, general question. And along with that is, of course, feel. What does your body feel? Does any part of your body notice at this point? So maybe it's hard to look at things. Oh, another thing, too, while we're talking about seeing things, if it is real hard to look at something, which is very common, sometimes the creatures are the very last thing they want to look at, and that comes up often. So I may say, well, pretend that you have a Polaroid camera, and you can hold it out here and take a snapshot, and then we'll study that snapshot later, and it works. It works real well. Or, you know, that curtain technique, well, you know, everything's behind a curtain, and you can just take a peek, but instead of looking, I'll have to stick the camera through and take that snapshot, and then pull it back and look at the snapshot, and they always know. But it's easier to look indirectly at this little snapshot than is the real thing live right before you. So that little indirect method works very well. Okay. Now I've divided these up. I just creatively kind of constructed these because apparently I'm the only one really digging into this aspect of the leading questions. And I've divided them up into what I call, first of all, the logical direction. Now this question suggests a logical response which does not arouse any suspicion or unusual feelings that this is a trick question at all to the subject because it's very rational. For example, they're in their bedroom and they see a being into the bed, pulling them out of the bed. And so I'll say, so you leave the bedroom by going into the hallway with them and down the stairs. It seems like how we usually leave the bedroom. And they'll say, no, this is weird. It seemed to be floating off the bed through the wall and out into the night air in a blue beam of light. Now, I did not ask for that. But because you propose something different, you get a lot of detail when they argue with you. And that is real helpful, actually, by suggesting the wrong response. They spend a lot of time telling you how you were wrong, which is exactly what you want to hear, is what actually happened. And then they're telling you stuff which matches, which they think is crazy. Another one, and this one no one's ever fallen for, and it's such a good one. In this room in which you report finding yourself, what do you notice in any of the corners? How many rooms do we have with corners? How many rooms have you been in that are totally round? Think about that. So it's very logical just to ask them, what do you see in any of the corners? And you see their eyes go round, round, round under their eyelids, and they say, I'm sorry, but there aren't any corners. It's a round room. And I love that because they've never fallen for that question, and it's such a logical question. So there again, they're telling me details by my asking the wrong questions. And you can create so many of those. Have fun with it because, you know, just think of all the logical answers it should be, and then note how they come up with the things to oppose you. And they have to go against the grain. They have to go against the logic and give you something bizarre. So when they consistently do that 30 times in a session, you're pretty convinced that they're remembering an experience and not just going along with your lead and your expectation and what you want them to say. Okay, another type is called the double assumption. If that wasn't tricky enough, now I double and triple layer the question. And here's an example. I'll say, when it opens its mouth, do you see a tongue and teeth or just a tongue? And no pun intended, but if they bite on that question, they will say, I say, well, wait a minute, it doesn't even open its mouth. But see, I assume that. I say, when it opens its mouth, then what do you see? And there's two tricks. The first trick is they have to buy the assumption that it opens its mouth. So that's a very strong suggestion. And then I only give them options that are both wrong to pick from. So they've got to go against all of that, from start to finish. And they still do. Every single time they tell me. Well, it doesn't have a mouth, or if it does, it doesn't do anything. So they don't even know how to answer the question, which is perfect. I like that. I will say, when it opens its mouth to talk to you, you hear a high, low, or medium-pitched voice. And again, they'll say it doesn't open its mouth, and I don't hear it with my ears. Two good answers. It's like its words are just in my head, like it says my thoughts, which aren't my thoughts, and there is no tone quality. So I think that's real interesting. Another set of leading questions are what I call the quick lead. And this refers to short, quick statements that are said abruptly, matter-of-factly. For example, the subject may say, I see one of their hands pass in front of my face. And I'll say, just right away, almost interrupting me, oh yeah, with 5 short, stubby fingers, right? And just throw it in there real quick, like, oh yeah, like I know what they're going to say, and I'm like leading them directly. Oh yeah, 5 short, stubby fingers. And they'll go, no. No, they're 4 long, slender fingers. But even with the quick jabs, as they call it, to try to lead them, it doesn't work. Another one is, they may be below a craft and they say an opening appears in the bottom of the craft. And I'll say, oh, and they lower their ladder, right? No, I'm in a beam of light and I'm inside next somehow. So again, they have to go against what I'm proposing. Another one, subject says, my God, I'm on this table with no clothes on whatsoever. And I'll say, so you grab your clothes and run, right? I mean, wouldn't you? You'd get out of there. No, I can't move, and for some reason I'm not really scared. So by arguing with you or correcting you, they give you all this wonderful detail that you did not elicit in any way. And I just find it wonderful. When I first started doing this, I thought, oh, I'm really going to confuse these people. I'm trying to lead them, and I'm going to just mess them up terribly. And when I found that they never could be led, then it was a challenge. It's like, well, let's see how tricky I can get, and let's see how, complex, and let's really just fire 5 in a row, and then 3 normal questions, and a couple open-ended ones, and then come back with 5 more trick ones, and just try to mess them up, and it doesn't work. It can't be led. And that's just amazing. Now here's another one, which actually Bud, he started me on this by giving me one. And this is one he gave me. I call it the missing option. And the trick is that you list all the options for the subject to pick from, but you don't give them the right answer. For example, does this being have red hair, blonde hair, brown hair, or black hair? And they'll always interrupt me before you get down to the list and say, oh, no, there's no hair at all. Or, then I'll immediately say, and this is, I just know how they can't be fooled by this, but I'll say, oh, so since there's no hair, the ears should be easy to see. Are they large, elongated, pointy, or roundish? So right away, they're thrown into another trick. And without fail, they say, well, sorry, I really don't see any ears either. There may be a little something there, but I just don't really see anything. So it's real obvious to me that talking from an experiential standpoint. And, when I ask about the communication, I don't say, do you hear a voice? Well, I may if it's a trick. But otherwise, if I'm just interested if there's any kind of interaction, I'll just say, are you aware of any type of communication? And that's pretty open-ended. And it's interesting because 99.9% of the time it's telepathic, but they never use the word telepathy. They always come at it from an experiential description. The words are in my head, but I don't know how they got there. They never say telepathy. Okay, now here's another one, which I call the shared secret. This trick with language does not always work, but has great value when it does work because of resistance. The subject may say, I'm not supposed to talk about what I'm seeing right now, which suggests some alien intervention. Now sometimes, if I really have a good rapport with the person, I'll say, come on, who do you trust, me or them? Really put them on the spot, because they know what the answer to that is. But I can't, really, I usually cannot break through that, and other researchers cannot either.
Have you ever tried to do it the way you do little children? What did your parents say you weren't supposed to tell?
Oh, that's exactly what I'm going to say here. I would say it two different ways. I'd say if you had a camera with you, what would it see? Okay, and there I kind of indirectly go about it. Or, and this is one of my favorite lines, well, if you could talk about it, what is it that you aren't supposed to tell? You know, so very similar to that. Or if your parents were here, what would they say that you're seeing? You know, so there's ways to go about it. And sometimes that works. Most of the time it doesn't, but it's a good thing to try, if anything. And the last type of thing, which I try to do in a trick way, is just to lead them with an opinion that I have. Again, the subject says, I'm lying naked on this table. And again, all this depends on your timing, your rapport with the person, trust, and the level of intensity of the feelings at the moment. But I might say something like, well, I wouldn't take it. I would have jumped up and told him what they could do with the little exam. Surely you just didn't lay there. That's a lot of pressure to like, well, no, I didn't. You know, I got up. And, you know. But no, they say, well, I can't move. I have no choice. I feel paralyzed. And they'll say, oh, you know, and I'll be very sympathetic. But, you know, I might throw an opinion there, just like, come on, you didn't just stay there and let them do this. Okay. So that's a little bit on the kinds of tricks. And those are, again, you can create your own and have a lot of fun with that. And you'll get a lot of good information that is clearly not the result of your question. Okay, and that's real important. Okay, now let's move to the end of the session. They come out, and let's talk about coping now. In terms of the kinds of phases and process that they go through.
John, before you go into coping, will there be a chance to talk further about hypnotic techniques, particularly for people who either have a difficult time being hypnotized, or if they do, the repression is so severe that material will not come out?
Well, we can talk about that for a minute. I think it's real important to respect the timing of the individual. A lot of times at that moment you'll feel frustrated because you really want to know what happened. But I've often found that if I'm real careful about what their needs are in the beginning, what their expectations are and how ready they are, I can avoid a lot of that resistance. A good example is parents who rightfully so recognize somehow the symptoms, the characteristics. I mean, a kid saw three strange little men in the park floating off the ground. Hour missing time, ends up naked in his bed, bicycle tossed in the front yard. Obviously, he's a little curious. He's not sleeping in his bed. He can't go to school. He feels ill. They were aware of a lot of stuff. He had a big scoop mark, and you'll see that in my slideshow, on his leg from 10 years earlier. Okay. And they rightfully call me and say, our kid needs help, you know. And I think, yeah, he does. But now, did you ask the kid if you want to be hypnotized? You ask the kid if he's ready to learn and uncover this. Big difference. Nothing came out. Tried, and then I realized foolishness, like, wait a minute, it wasn't his idea, it was their idea. And you often get a good friend of someone saying, this person really needs help, you need to work with them, and the person might kind of consciously say, yeah, okay, but they're not really ready or into it, and you may run into a lot of resistance. Instead of pushing hard to get around that, and I think if you do a detailed session and you try real hard, I've found that when it's ready to come out, it comes rolling out. I've had to slow people down because they almost get overwhelmed with so much that they're experiencing. And with others that I have to pull teeth and work so hard, I've learned just to back off and say, wait a minute, you know, I'm not sure this is the right time. Why don't you just keep a dream journal or just kind of write down your feelings and come back to me when you're sure you're ready. And often they say, oh good, because I really didn't feel, I thought I was, but as I really started into this, I really got scared. I'm just not quite ready yet. And that's fine, it's great. So a lot of resistance can be avoided in really checking out what they need, what their expectations are. Otherwise, you can use very typical hypnotic techniques to get around that.
What if, as adults, they feel very strongly they're ready, and they have for years, and they remember a lot consciously. They may even be communing with other beings.
One
But-
problem there is they may have a pretty okay feeling about it. They may feel fairly settled, but what might be locked away still are some very upsetting aspects or incidents. And I found that the people that thought they remembered everything and they were pretty content and felt pretty positive, and then something triggered something further a year or two later, and it was not Mr. Nice Guy any longer. It was very upsetting, and their whole way of looking at it was different. You have to kind of peel it like an onion, a layer at a time when it's ready, and sometimes there's a lot of layers, and a lot of different feelings.
You
Yes.
count that in your hypnotic suggestions, like a mystic block of some kind, that you sense that they are really having some difficulty with this.
Yeah.
They'll come back later when they feel it's necessary.
Yes, I'll say it, or I may say, you may find as you come out of trance that you'll start remembering other little bits and pieces of things, and you'll be able to jot those down.
Or you may not.
Or you may not, that's right. Yeah, because I don't want to really push that they're going to remember more, but I'll just say it might happen. Don't be surprised. If you notice that, jot it down. If it happens, fine. At a later point, you may feel a need again. I've often told people to come to me, and it may take a year or two to kind of toy with the idea of doing this. And, you know, we may be ready the next day to do it, but they may kind of just feel it out for a year or two before they really get serious about pursuing it.
You ever use the hypnotic response to give you some indication whether I should feel blocked or allow them to open up?
Yes, that's a very good technique. If you're getting resistance and blocked up, you may just ask their unconscious, you know, whether they have
Time to remember this or not.
right, and that's a very good check too. Okay. Ironically, I don't have with me the coping list, but I know it by heart. The first thing that happens is they're amazed at what they came up with. They don't exactly think that they're crazy because they know it felt very real. And the feelings are validating their memory. And that's a very important part. The feelings really smash. And often during the experience I say, well, this is a dream, right? And they'll go, no way. You know, this was real and I can't believe I forgot it. You know. But after the session, you would think that they'd be just totally blown away by all this crazy stuff they came up with. But actually there's a sense of relief. And almost a sense of knowing, like, gosh, I can't believe like Sky's daughter came out of the session shaking her head. And I go, what's the matter? She goes, you know, I just kind of always knew that was there, but I just couldn't really think about it. And she goes, there's lots of stuff. And I really don't want to know anymore, but that was good for me just to know that. And it was kind of a confirming thing for her. There's a relief. They sleep better. Their anxiety decreases significantly. And initially, there's this wonderful sense of relief in that they've been helped. Now, almost immediately, though, within 24 hours or 48 hours, they wake up and find themselves in a world of disbeliefs. And this is the second line of trauma. Who do they tell? They may trust their best friend. The best friend dumps them. I've seen this happen too many times. It's really upsetting. They may mention something offhand to a coworker, and suddenly the coworker says, oh my God, I can't believe I've had that too. Someone they never dreamed would have had an experience. They can't tell their family. They're very isolated and alone, and they may get very depressed. Now, what I think happens here is what I call a grieving process. Grieving the loss of their former reality. All of a sudden, and this really fits, all of a sudden they have to think about their world in a whole new and different way. And nobody else around them is doing that yet. So they're really in a unique position. They have anger over that it happened to them, anger that the aliens didn't ask permission, anger that now they've got this part of their life permanently, and they, almost like a broken leg that didn't heal right, and they've got to limp along for years. Depression because they're alone with it and they don't know what to do. You know, they start bargaining, you know, all these parts of the grieving process. Well, maybe if I just went to another hypnotist, it wouldn't be true. And maybe if I just, go to church, it'll all go away. Or, it's something, and it never works. I'll say, sure, go ahead. I'll never tell them it won't work. Let's just try it, They always come back. No, it's real. It's there. Okay, so they struggle with that. A key thing to do at that moment is put them in touch with someone by phone. Now, immediately you might say, I don't know anybody. Let me touch it. Wrong. You call me, you call Beth, you call any of us. We've got a network of people all across the country that they can call. People like Scott, people like Debbie from Bud's book. They will gladly talk to anyone. And it's not that they share all their details. They're supportive, they understand, they know what the feelings are, they've been there, it's wonderful. And so you do have that resource. And the only problem is the telephone bill might be 2 or 3 hours long, real easily. But it's worth it to them. It's invaluable. It's incredible. So that helps. The first step in a supportive network. Eventually you'll get some local people that you can call and talk to that you've worked with. And at first I might have them just talk to me or my assistant before they learn as much as they can from their experiences. But when that is in need of something bigger, something, in terms of connecting with other people who've been through it.
The lack of aloneness type of thing.
Exactly. Someone they can know they can turn to and talk. And it's incredible how wonderful that has worked. Just absolutely. And they've made connections I didn't even know they were going to make. It's like, hey, we talked about this. And I said, oh, really? You never told me about that. Yeah, well, we just started talking, and we realized that we connected in this way, and this way, and this way, and I didn't even know that would happen. But it makes sense. If you had 2 people who experienced rape, and you let them talk, they would connect in lots of ways that you'd never think about emotionally, and little things that you wouldn't even think to ask, because they've shared a similar experience. Eventually, you get enough people, and it might take a couple of years. It took me at least 2 years to get enough people to start having a support group. And I would start with at least 3 or 4 and build on it. Now, they're dedicated. Your attendance will be better than any other kind of group you've ever run because there's no other place to go. And it's such a need to connect. Now, the goal of a support group, there's several goals. Feeling human. You want them just to be with others and be able to be themselves and to feel okay again, and yet still be able to share this peculiar experience. You don't want them just dwelling on the experience. You want them to talk and to party a little and to laugh and to feel good, to feel grounded, to feel okay, and that they can be with other people and that other people are normal too, and they see that now, and that sense of normalcy is very important. That helps them feel that they aren't alone with it, they aren't insane, and it's not just a unique, crazy thing in their head. So that's a real important thing. And then a notorious problem that rips support group after support group apart is the notion of whether it's good or evil. And it comes up every time, and it can tear it apart because people will cope in their own way and process it in their own way, and they'll categorize it in their own way. I've often said if you take 50 people and send them to a movie theater, and they all see the same exact film, you ask that same 50 people when they came out, they all loved it. Are they going to say that? No. Some hated it, some thought it was a waste of money, some thought it was pretty good, but this part really was stupid. Others will say, well, I don't even remember that part, but I remember this part, and I like that. So you get all these different reactions, and some people will say, oh, that's the best movie of the year. Now, that's human nature. That's human response. And they all had the exact same stimulus. Now, when I step back and look at all these encounters, essentially the same kinds of things happen over and over and over. And the same ways that people are treated are essentially the same over and over and over. There's a little variation, but basically it's pretty much alike. But what's different is the human response. All across the board. I'm victimized, I'm traumatized, I hate their guts, I never want to see them again, I want to kill them. Someone else, it was so spiritually uplifting. What do you do with that? Now you get them in the same support group. You can know what's going to happen. They're going to argue. How can you say that? And they fight and they argue. And what I try to do is I tell them, look, each of you is going to react to this differently, and you each have a right to how you feel. You cannot take that away from another person. Each person has a right to process this and categorize it their own way. So that's not an issue here. And that helps. It's hard, though, because they still want to debate that. And it's just a way of trying to be sure that they're coping okay. You know, they want to make sure their category is right. They want to make sure they process it right. So emotionally, it's real important that other people see it the way they see it, and it's just impossible.
I think it's important, too, though, to point out that some of the key people in the field, in the research field, are becoming very polarized one way or the other as well. And that polarization, I think, involves a tremendous amount of projection and can really distort the effectiveness of the group or even the interaction on one-on-one. And I think it's extremely important for anyone who's actually trying to be a helper in this situation, no matter what you really think is going on, to stay neutral about it.
Exactly.
You know.
Because you'll find that you'll have, I mean, you can have a subject that will convince you that this is what's happening, and this is the way it is, and this is what they're doing. And your next one will be just the opposite, and that will confuse you if you don't just stay neutral. It's very true what Michael says. And if you don't know, this is Michael Lindemann back here, one of our speakers. What he says is exactly right. Researchers, Bud takes this kind of a little on the negative side in terms of people are being victimized and not being asked for permission. It's not okay what's happening, and it's kind of awful. John Mack's support group has been very positive because John Mack takes a very positive outlook, and he kind of is leading that way. But 4 or 5 have dropped out of the support group, Bud told me, because they don't fit in. They don't feel that way. And so they have nothing now. And I don't think that meant to happen, but it naturally happened because they didn't feel like their feelings fit. So you can't, have a particular stance. You have to remain neutral.
Would it be a good idea, I mean, kind of get the feeling that the group is splitting, if you've got people to do it, to literally form 2 groups, one positive and one negative?
Well, that might be nice for them, and it may happen anyway, because they'll just kind of band together and hang out together. That's okay for their own way of coping. I think it's good for them to be exposed to other possibilities, other people's feelings, that they may not be right. I don't think it's essential, but it's going to keep it a little skewed and a little difficult, especially if they suddenly then remember something awful and it doesn't fit with all of what their group's been saying. Where do they go then? And they've made such enemies out of the other people who have had those feelings that do they dare show their face there? And so they may kind of cut themselves off.
Do you set any limits on who can be in the group like this? Would it have to be someone that you've worked with or somebody else that you trust that's worked with, or would you allow anybody to kind of come in who says, I'm not?
No. That happened in a couple of groups. And I was upset with the person who that night was running it for me because I couldn't be there, and they let this person just had any hypnosis sessions and said they're an abducting. They got in there and started bad-mouthing this and bad-mouthing that and upset the group, and they didn't have any confirmed experiences. I try to make it people that I've worked with, which of course in my area of the country, it's probably only people I've worked with. There's not anyone else too close nearby. But if somebody was nearby and he had somebody that needed to come to my group, I'd say sure, because I would trust him and that he'd done a certain amount of work. I don't think a person should join a group until they've had a couple of sessions and really know what all they can know.
Wouldn't that kind of contaminate the memory?
Well, I've watched that and I've found it doesn't, just like leading questions, it really doesn't seem to make much difference. I've had them come up with things that no one ever talked about in the group after they've been in the group for a while. It turned out it matched other people in other parts of the country, but no one in the group. I've never seen anyone like be a part of a UFO in my group in Springfield, either part of the public meeting and then come to me and start claiming experiences, or be a part of the abduction support group and then start claiming other things. I've not seen that happen. It's interesting. You would think that that would, but it doesn't.
Can you direct me in literature with me? Tell me how this may differ from other altered states of consciousness. They're coming up with other explanations. I guess this is like delinearizing or something like that.
Yeah, that is a good question. My paper covers a lot of things, and I think it lists most of the categories in that little paragraph. But there are other things like Kundalini, and you can, let's see.
I think you can tease those out, some questions.
Yeah. But do you know of anybody who's written on the comparisons in particular?
I'm thinking about the Omega Project that came out.
Yes, that's probably as good as any by Kenneth Ring. Yeah, he does a good look at near-death experiences, out-of-body, clinical death, spirituality. That's a real good book. It's intriguing. It doesn't solve the whole mystery by any means, because then you go back to the 2- and 3-person cases, and when they see each other board a craft, it's a little hard to believe it's just coming from some spiritual experience or connection. But I know of one case where a person had a near-death, in fact I know of 2 cases where a person had a near-death experience, and during the clinical death encounter, the bright light, the tunnel, and they're surrounded by little graves. It's like, wait a minute, that should be over here, not part of this. And I know of another experience where a person was recalling an abduction, and they were taken during the abduction to the bedside of someone who was dying to, quote, help them with the transition. So the boundaries get real fuzzy, and I'm sure we're going to get deeper into that. It doesn't help. You'd like to stay nice, neat, clear, like, you don't go through walls and you can lay it out neatly, but it gets more bizarre. I did mention in that list of symptomology that actually it's true. The history of poltergeist activity often is in the background of the family. I actually should add that in there. That comes up a lot. Wrappings on the wall, objects moving. Now you don't know whether that's because they have enhanced psychic ability and they're doing that inadvertently with some kind of energy that they now tap into. You don't know whether that's what's happening or whether aliens are invisible and playing tricks or anything. I don't know. But it is there in the background. It is there as part of the data pattern.
John, how do you handle a situation in which 2 people who have never met physically, but through some means began corresponding, begin to realize that they have shared experiences?
Oh, yeah.
Now, but
Yeah,
they
come on.
don't want to contaminate one another's memories by just starting to say what has happened.
I've had people from different support groups, and they come into a room with investigators and other people there, and they'll see each other and they'll go, oh my God. And they'll both at the same moment do that. I've seen you. And he goes, yeah, I've seen you. And we're, in this room. They go, yeah. And he goes, do you remember that funny instrument? He goes, you mean the one that was long like this? I go, yeah. I go, I never could figure out how that worked. Well, they showed me. It works. Oh, yeah. And they'll start having this conversation. Then they'll stop and they'll look at each other and they'll go, where are you? I don't even know who. But there's this connecting. And that comes up surprisingly more than I would have expected, a connecting with others. And really, I mean, if there's 30 people in the room, how they would even know that that person had experience or could even begin to talk to them in that way is remarkable.
Is it appropriate, though, to go ahead and start talking about certain things?
Well, you can't stop all of it. I mean, we can't keep them like in little cages in a lab and say, you can't do this and you can't do that, because these are humans out there with a lot of feelings. We can just do our best at suggesting to them, if you encounter someone that's had an experience, don't tell them anything, just refer them to us and we'll start our process. If you suspect you know them, don't tell them, just tell me and maybe we'll, but that's hard, I mean, because these things happen, just they connect and they're going to stop and say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do this. They're going to remember that.
Well, there's a problem too for research. There's a mixed motivation here, and I think that, you know, in a certain sense, you have to make up your mind whether you're actually gathering data or wearing your helper hat.
Right.
Because you got to go, it's two different pathways. And one of the big complaints, especially in working with abductees, is that data-oriented people, you know, want to preserve a certain purity even at the expense of that person's well-being. And so you really have to decide which hat you're wearing and not get confused yourself. Because if the primary reason that you're seeing this person is to help them deal with something, then that's a different pathway.
Yeah.
If you're trying to like discover the truth about what happened, which is not necessarily what they need to find.
Yeah. I've been told that I can't exist. Or that I'm a rare breed that might become extinct because I'm wearing two hats. But what I've found is that when the person's calm during the session and going along, I can get details that fit research, and when they're into their feelings, the therapist hat comes out, and I switch over to that, and it can be done. I think that it's hard for a lot of people, and I don't know, I guess for some reason I just am able to do that fairly well. But I've had arguments with myself, the investigator with the therapist, saying, well, you should know, you can't do that. No, I have debates with myself. Yes?
John, could you talk a little bit about transformational aspects of long-term, people that you maybe work with long-term and kind of from their experience, and what are some of the changes in them, and maybe...
Is that another phase? Is that like a series of phases?
Yes, it really is. And there again, we have people that did make the connection, and their long-term result is severe dysfunction, perhaps. They may dissociate. They may have personalization and feelings. They may have existential anxiety. They may have alcoholism. They may have endless problems in relationships, which may look like something else, but when you do treatment for that, it never seems to help until they actually finally deal with this, and then it's amazing how much that can make a difference. But on the more positive end, you're going to get a beautiful example of that with Sky later today. She will tell you exactly, most of her talk is on her transformation. She turned from marketing and sales, I believe, into body work and energy work and healing work, which was totally the opposite end of the spectrum from where she had been. And her year-long struggle and her process. I don't see everyone do that, but I see people here and there that make an incredible career change, and they're very happy, and they seem to be following their feelings, their intuitions. Sometimes they feel like they're following someone else's direction. And that's okay. They seem very happy in that.
Well, that brings up one question. Do you feel that any of these experiences are being prepared for something?
Well, they say that a lot. I didn't mention this either in symptomology, but often it's reported they feel like they're in a classroom or teaching situation. But classically, they don't know what they're being taught. And the interesting thing about that is this was some fantasies. They'd be the first ones to tell you what they learned. If there's a delusion, they'd be the first ones to tell you what incredible things that they've learned and should pass on to humanity. But none of them know what it is. They're saying, it's like I was up all night studying and in some classroom. I can't tell you a single thing. They showed me this book. They said, memorize it. I don't know what it was. I said, do it yourself. I said, give it to someone who understands, you know. All this stuff comes up, and constantly they get this feeling of I'm being prepared for something. I have a role to play. I don't know what it is. But it's like, at some time, I'm told I will understand and I will know. And they said, why the heck don't they get someone who cares? Why don't they get someone who would like to do this? I mean, I don't care. And when the time comes, they'll be lucky if I do it. You know, so you get that kind of a feeling and reaction. It's interesting.
Is there any pattern on who's selected?
No. That's a very good question. We've looked at blood types, we've looked at heritage, we've looked at physical characteristics, we've looked at personalities, we've And essentially, sure, my field, all the different psychiatric types, they're all across the board. Sure, I've had some borderline personality still in there, and I've had some people that suffer bouts of depression. I've had some with manic spells, but there's no pattern. You know, with multiple personality, you can almost be guaranteed you're going to find sexual trauma and terrible abuse in the background. It's almost guaranteed, and you almost always find it. That's a pattern, and you can almost predict it. In these people, there's no pattern. Some may have had some sexual abuse. It's not related. In fact, there's more cases where they thought they were abused by humans, and it wasn't.
Geographical?
No. Now that Russia is more open and the people feel more open, we're getting classic little gray accounts from there.
There was a while back, we had a special on India, and illiterate people, so it wasn't people who were in isolated areas and were illiterate, they could not have known these.
Africa, South America. Now you do get different alien types, and I won't go into that, but there are a lot of similarities worldwide. The only thing that is similar is that when a person is apparently involved, you can trace it through almost every generation, sooner or later. And I have several four-generation cases, and you'll hear me talk about one on Sunday. The problem is you can't go back any farther because people aren't there to talk to you. You go back 4 generations, you've gone back a number of years. And before the Civil War,